Hi, just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking to you guys about plants that you can use underneath power lines. You know, a lot of times out there in the landscaping we've seen it where a tree has been planted in the wrong spot. It grows up, it's big and pretty and everything, doing everything it's supposed to do, but then it gets too big and it's got to be trimmed back by our power companies. So I want to talk to you a little bit about a little bit of responsibility about what to do that's good practice around power lines, because keep in mind, whenever tree limbs come down and land on power lines, it takes out power for maybe your neighbor, but maybe for you too. And so to use good practice underneath power lines when you're landscaping is always something that needs to be thought of as one of the first things that you consider, because who wants to go out there and spend a lot of time growing a plant and get it up to where they want it, and then all of a sudden one day the power company call you and say, hey, look, you know, we're going to have to trim on your tree, and you're not going to really have a whole lot to say about it. So make sure that you go out there with something that's going to provide what you want it to do, whether or not it be a screen, whether or not it just be for decoration or for blooms or whatever it may be, but you can make a plant selection that you can plant under and around power lines that's going to be able to stay there without being bothered down the road. Starting off here with one of the things that I like to use, and this is called an Althea. It's otherwise known as a Rose of Sharon. This particular variety is called Blushing Bride, and it's a double-flowered Althea, and it's only going to reach a height of 18 to 20 feet max. So you know that you're never going to be growing it up into the power line. Another thing about Altheas is that they really do love the Oklahoma dry climate even and heat. This plant is akin to a cotton plant. So it likes our area inherently and will grow well here and bloom prolifically even under heat and drought conditions. Doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be watered. As you can see, this Althea here, it's going to stand about 11 feet tall and about 11 feet wide. So, you know, it can take up a lot of room in the landscape and throw a screen up for you, or also to be able to provide with blooms that you can see from a distance real well. But the main thing about it is it's a great, dependable plant for our hot summers here in Oklahoma. Another great plant to use here in Oklahoma for underneath power lines and for an evergreen, for a screen, for beautiful blossoms that smell wonderful, is your teddy bear magnolia. Teddy bear is one of the more of the dwarf southern magnolias that there are. You've heard of Little Jim, you've heard of Bracken's Brown Beauty. Those plants actually get probably a little bit too big to be used underneath power lines. The thing about a magnolia too is that the soil makes a difference. You want to have a soil. You don't want to be out in a heavy clay. You want to be in a good, fertile, well-drained soil when you plant magnolias so that they'll do well for you. And we can give you some tips and how-tos on how to grow a pretty magnolia, but it's better to start these in an area where your soils are real good so that you get good, good growth on it each year and going to have good blooms and so forth. But the teddy bear magnolia is another really good plant for screen and not going to get too tall to get underneath the power lines. Teddy bear is supposed to grow somewhere around 20 feet tall. I've seen them grow a little taller down in the south, down along the Gulf Coast. But here in Oklahoma, I think 20 feet is a really good size for it, and probably going to be about a 12-foot spread. So like I said before, it makes a good plant you can use for a screen, but also as a specimen. And most of all, though, those blossoms that you get off of it coming up here in a few weeks. But teddy bear magnolia is a good one. Another great plant for planting around power lines and around, and also can serve well as a screen, is this great evergreen tree here called Thunderhead pine. This particular tree is a sport of the Pinus thunbergii, which is the old Japanese black pine. So it likes to grow. It grows pretty fast, and it really does like the heat and drier weather here that we have in the southern plains. So Thunderhead pine is also great for, you could go in and topiary it, make palms out of it, do different things to it, but it's always got something going on. And it's the best thing about it is it's dependable. It's also resistant to the nematode problem that some pines have had. So it's a very good pine and a dwarfer pine so that you can use it around your power lines and areas where you don't want it to get more than 20 feet tall. Amur Maple is one of the toughest growing plants in our area, and it's one of these trees that will fit the bill for being no taller than really 20 feet. The one that we're picturing here has about an 18-foot spread on it. And Amur Maple, I like it better, I think, in a multi-stem because it tends to spread more. And so I think about using it for screens and different things like that too. But Amur Maple also you can get it in a single stem, so it'll grow more upright. It's just not going to spread quite as much, but its best attribute is the fact of its fall color. It's one of the early turners, and whenever it turns, it lets you know. I mean, it's really bright red, and it just does great. And it's another one of those trees that really does like our hot, dry climate, and the heat doesn't bother it. So it's one of these that would work well around areas where you can't get it up there in those power lines, and Amur Maple is a great plant for Oklahoma. One of my favorite ornamentals, and especially for color, is the good old purple plum. Purple plum transplants really well. It just does well in our climate, and it has, as you can see, the dark purple color which it will hold throughout the summer, probably better than any other plant to actually hold color throughout the summer. It's hard to beat the purple plum. We get questions about people wanting to use Japanese maples and things like that out in the yard because they like the color. And whenever we hear that, I try to steer them away from that because of the wind, the sun, and other things to go out there and put them on a plant that's going to throw off that kind of color, but I actually like the conditions out in the full sun. And this plant, once again, not going to get taller than 20 feet or so, and going to have about a 16-foot spread on it, so it can be used underneath and around power lines without having to worry about them getting cut down someday. So also has a really pretty early spring bloom of pink, so it's a really good tree for our area and will fit and work in all those conditions. Of course, whenever it comes to shorter growing trees and everything, we have got to talk about the crabapple. And crabapples, there are so many different varieties, different forms, different colors, different foliage colors, and everything else. But the one thing about them is you can be sure of is that they're not going to get tall to where you're going to have to cut them down underneath power lines. So crabapple, this is one called Spring Snow here, and you can see the leaves on it are more green. And whenever it blooms in the spring, it looks like that Bradford pear you remember from back in the day. Just loads down with blooms and has sort of a gold colored bark in its new bark and everything, which makes it real attractive. And once again, going to get to a height of about 20 feet and stop there, maybe a spread near 20 feet on its own too. But once again, one of those plants that's very hardy here, likes it in the southern plains, and with a little bit of pruning technique and everything, a long-lived good tree. So this is called Spring Snow. And another crabapple that we like real well, this is an old-fashioned one here. This is called Radiant. And Radiant, this is basically at its mature size right now. I'm going to say it may be up there around 16, 18 feet with a spread of about 14 feet. And really a prolific grower here. Has a really pretty, bright pink bloom on it in the springtime. And that's the first thing you see is the blooms on these. And they do great, and then it loads up with a persistent fruit that turns a real pretty red color. And when I say persistent, that means that the fruit stays on it. It doesn't fall off on the ground unless birds come and pick it off or whatever. So it doesn't make a big mess during the summer months. And so there's these crab apples, and then shoot, I could think of 15 others off the top of my head that do well here. For instance, we have Royal Raindrops, which is actually an improved variety of this in the nursery right now that are just, fantastic trees and would be a really good plant to plant out there for your color or for just even a small shade tree. They do a great job. So crabapples are something that definitely need to be on the menu for planting around power lines. Another great tree for the southern plains and for hot, dry climates is the Shantung Maple. Shantung Maple, as you can see, this one here has got about an 18-foot spread, and it's about 18 feet tall. And it'd be another plant where you could use it to plant under your power lines. One of the main things about Shantung Maple that makes it really nice, though, is that it has a very, very intense fall color in the early fall. So, and it, like I said, it likes the hot, dry climate and will do extremely well here in Oklahoma. So you get it going and get one of these established, and they're easy to grow. You know, I always like it whenever I've got a plant that can do a lot of different things for me. And one of the things about your junipers is that they provide evergreen, and so they're great for screens. They're also medium-sized growers, so they can be used where they're not going to get too tall for like power lines and so forth. And this one is called Hollywood Juniper, and you can see that it's very irregular in shape. But once again, one of those plants is just one of my favorites because of how well it likes our climate here. You wouldn't know this, but about 7 feet from me is a big transformer that had to be placed out here with the power company. And so you can't see that transformer now because of being able to block it with foliage and stuff. So, you know, they come in real handy, got a lot of different uses, and like I said, hardy and great to grow in Oklahoma, and can be used just pretty much anywhere where you don't have to worry about interference and getting up into power lines. So Hollywood Junipers is a great choice. The Blue Point Juniper is also another plant that can be used in confined spaces where you can't get too much height, but you also want screen, and it gives you this blue color. Like, really, there's a few junipers that do, but Blue Point's consistent. The best thing about Blue Point, though, is that you can expect that it's not going to get more than 12 feet tall, and it may get 8 feet wide, and it grows relatively pyramidal on its own. So it's a great plant for here, and provides you with that color. Like I said, stays down there in that height range where it's not going to give you problems, but also gets tall enough to where if you want to block something off with it, you can do it. So Blue Point Juniper is another, many of the many junipers out there that will be able to accomplish these types of things for you. So Blue Point Juniper is a great plant for Oklahoma. Of course, whenever you're planting trees in Oklahoma, you've always got to think about the redbud. I mean, it's the state tree. And this particular cultivar is the Oklahoma redbud, and it's the one that has the darkest colored blooms on it in the spring, and it really does show up a lot better than the eastern redbud does out in the landscape. And it's also more dwarf. It doesn't grow quite as tall. But in either case, either with an eastern redbud, an Oklahoma redbud, or possibly even a Texas whitebud, which blooms white, they're all trees that will fit into that space where you can plant them underneath power lines and use them there. And obviously, you know what the blooms do, so it's a bright spring show, and the leaves on these are sort of shiny and more textured, so they don't get beaten up by the wind so bad here in our climate. But your redbud, there's several different varieties of these. Most of them prefer to be in a full sun, but there's a few of them that like to be a little bit more protected, some of the newer cultivars, and you might want to ask us about that before you get too crazy on planting redbuds. But you can be sure that the eastern redbud and the Oklahoma redbud are ones that will do great out in the sun and not going to get into the power lines. Now we're going to talk to you a little bit about hollies, and there's several different kinds of hollies that will work well in these types of applications. And we're standing in front of a Foster holly, and Foster's probably, of all the hollies that I'm going to talk about, it's going to be the one that's going to grow the tallest. You can expect that in time it may make 25 feet. So you've got to make sure kind of that you're under an area where you're not going to get above that. But Foster hollies is a great evergreen, and this one here has been trained for tree form. You can shear them and make them real tight. You can do a lot of different things with Foster holly, but one of the main reasons why I like to do it in tree form is because it sets these berries on them, and they just load up with berries in the fall and winter, and it's just really a pretty plant then, more pretty then than it is now. But it's also, being an evergreen, it's something that you can get a tall screen out of, so it can be used in those situations. Some of your other hollies, and you've seen us on here talk about the Nellie R. Stevens holly. It's a great holly that grows more pyramidal and conical, and a great evergreen, once again, with great berries and stuff, height of about 18 to 20 feet. So it's a good holly for here. There's some of the red hollies like Oakland and oak leaf holly, which are also real similar to your Nellie R. Stevens in form and everything. And they do well. But another one that's a tree form that just does fantastic here is your Yaupon Holly. And Yaupon is a native plant to Oklahoma. It's a multi-stemmed plant in most circumstances, so it gets a broad head on it. Once again, great for fall berries and evergreen. But the main reason I like Nellie or the Yaupon Holly so much is because it's native and it just really does like growing in this climate. So, and does extremely well and trouble-free. Really not much goes wrong with them and everything. So there's a really nice little set of hollies in there that will also fit the application of being able to be planted where it's not going to get too tall for you. So lots of different hollies and good choices there.